Okay, so the next speaker is Claude Castelluccia from INRIA. Claude is also a member of a privacy community for a long time, and has been doing research on various topics, but also he was involved in the French contact tracing apps and its design. And as you know, French government took another way, and Claude is going to talk about it, how this approach and this way was from his point of view. Claude,
okay.
The stage is yours.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation. It's actually nice to be part of a workshop where you don't feel alone. Actually, I made up this story like a few months ago about Asterix, Obelix, and the COVID app, because this is really how we felt when we worked on this app. You know, we really felt like this small village in France that was fighting against the invaders. So I could write a whole book about Asterix and Obelix and the COVID app. Maybe that's something I will do later. But today I will talk about the French app, which is now called TousAntiCovid. And yeah, usual disclaimer, it's my own view. It's not the view of INRIA or of the French government. So the work started in mid of March as an INRIA internal project. And then with the special design constraint that we wanted the system to be controlled and managed by the health authority. And also we wanted a system that was privacy preserving and GDPR compliant. So the first version we started working on was decentralized. We actually had discussion with DP3T, but very soon we realized that this will not work, because both constraints were not satisfied. I mean, the system could not be controlled by the health authority because of the distributed nature of the scheme, but also because it was not privacy preserving, because as we all know now, it's easy with this scheme to basically re-identify and track infected users, which was clearly not acceptable from our point of view, and also from the point of view of the French DPA, like the CNIL, it was not acceptable. So end of March, we moved to the so-called centralized approach and team up with the German contact tracing team, which at that time was already been working on the centralized scheme for a long time. They were actually about to launch the system where we joined them. And then, you know the story, suddenly they stop and they back up and move to the Google and Apple scheme for, I mean, I'm sure Ahmad knows the story, mostly for political reason. So we've basically stayed by ourselves, and we launched Stop COVID in June. And we actually released a new version of Stop COVID that is called TousAntiCovid a few weeks ago in October. So the TousAntiCovid tool includes now 3 functionalities. Soon there will be 4. So there is the contact tracing scheme that is based on the Robert protocol, and I will describe it. But there is also a news kiosk, so you can get a lot of information about the COVID in France, the number of infected people, and also information about the TousAntiCovid application, like how many people registered, how many notification was sent, how many people uploaded their key. And the third functionality is an attestation. So in France, we are still in lockdown. If you want to go out and move, you need to write up an attestation with the reason why you're going out. And with this application, TousAntiCovid, you can do it with the application. You don't have to write it on a piece of paper. So we have these 3 now functionality, and we now have like more than 10 million registered users, and this number are increasing every day. So we hope that we'll get 15 million or even more if possible. So I will skip this slide because you all know now about digital contact tracing, why it's useful. There were some questions about whether those tools are useful or not. There are some studies from Oxford that shows that this can have a significant impact on the propagation of the disease. But there is also a new study from INSERM. So INSERM is the French National Research Center in Health, that they show by simulation that if 30% of the French population was using this app, it will basically reduce the transmission of the COVID by a proportion of 40%. So the impact is, I mean, there is like significant impact if people use the application. So how does the contact tracing apps works? Basically, you have three phases. The first one is proximity discovery. So it's when you actually move and encounters other people. Then you have the phase, it's what we call infected user declaration, when a user is infected and get a code from the health authority. And the third step, it's the exposure status notification, is when a user actually get notified that is at risk and should either isolate or get a test. So there were two, as you know, now two architectures. Some people were saying that the scheme should be decentralized, and we decided, as you know, we decided to go for the so-called centralized scheme. Although, as you see, the decentralized are not as decentralized as they claim it is. So why did we go for a centralized architecture? There are many reasons, but the first reason is that we really wanted the health authority to be able to compute the score that are used to notify a user, but also to control how the notifications are sent. Okay, we didn't want a system that were notifying people by itself without any control from the health authority. And also because there are several studies that shows that in order to control this pandemic, this notification has to be done centrally. So that's actually one of the reasons we actually went for decentralized. The other reason is that, as Serge and Ivan already described, the decentralized notification is too dangerous because it basically means that you have to push the personal information of all infected users to the mobile devices, to the mobile apps, right? So you're basically broadcasting personal information that do not belong to you, but to infected user, to everybody else application. And as a result, you can easily re-identify and trace all infected nodes. And there've been like several proof of concept. One of them, was published by some Swedish group. And recently there is an app that is called coronadetective.edu that allows you actually to re-identify infected users very easily. So I don't have to go more into the details of this, explain more this. So how does the Robert protocol works? So the first step, the nodes gets configured with pseudo identifiers that we call ephemeral IDs by the server. So the server actually computes the IDs and send them to the server. When a user moves, his app will broadcast these ephemeral IDs that change every 15 minutes in order to avoid tracking. Sorry. Once again, these IDs are generated by the server, and the apps are actually collecting the ephemeral IDs of the nodes that they are encountering. When a user is tested positive, he goes to the doctors, he gets a code, and it enters this code into the system, to the app, and as a result, the app will upload the list of ephemeral ID that this app collected. So it's basically the ephemeral IDs of users that were in contact with a node that is now infected. The server will collect this information, will first break the social graph. So there is a front-end server that gets this information, break the social graph, and send all these ephemeral IDs one by one to the backend server that will just store them in a list. So we don't have any more information about the social graph or social proximity of the users. And the fourth step, the server is using this information to upload, to compute, sorry, the risk score of each registered users. And regularly, each user will send a query to the server to ask basically whether any of his ephemeral IDs were part of a list of infected users. Okay, and if the score of this user is higher than a given threshold that can be modified by the health authority very easily, the user gets notified. If the score is lower, it doesn't get notified. It's quite easy. So what about the big brother risk? So people are often asking, I mean, you have a centralized system, it's very risky. As a matter of fact, I received last week an email from 2 employees from Facebook asking me, so what, don't you think that having a centralized server, it's too risky? And for a while, I thought it was a scam. I thought it was Ahmad that was sending me a scam just for the fun of it. I had to read the email several times. No, it was actually Facebook employees asking me whether I think it was risky to have a centralized server. So I told them I will answer to this question during the talk. So this is my question to Facebook and to all others that are wondering why we went for a server. So we're not Facebook. We're not collecting location. We're not collecting health sensitive data. We are not collecting behavioral data. We don't target, we don't profile users. We don't manipulate users. We don't manipulate election. We don't manipulate democracy. We don't distribute nor monetize our data. Okay, that has to be clear. We are not doing anything like that. We are only collecting pseudo identifier. We remove all social graph information. We apply data minimization. Everything is transparent and audited, as opposed to Facebook. The French DPA, the CNIL, is auditing the system regularly, as well as the ANSSI, which is the French security agency. There is a strong oversight and there is strong accountability. And finally, our goal is not to monetize data, but it's really to help people to fight the virus. And I guess that makes a huge difference between Facebook and what we are doing. I hope this is clear to Facebook, but also to everybody else. The goal is not to exploit people, but to help fighting this pandemic. So something that has to be clear is that capitalism surveillance by private company is different from health monitoring by state health authority that are elected democratically, especially for some country like France. So we should not mix them up. I mean, they are really 2 different things. And the other things that I think it's important to the privacy community is that privacy doesn't mean to take data away from health authority. It means to build a trust relationship with them. And that's a huge difference. We should not trump health authority, I mean, the protection against this virus for privacy if it doesn't make sense. Once again, it's not about taking data away, it's to provide some trust relationship. There is this MIT review ratings. I don't know if you're aware of it, but regularly MIT review is comparing the different tracing app, and they published an update version last Sunday where they clearly show that the French app is one of the best in terms of privacy, in the sense that it limits data that it collects. There is data minimization, everything is transparent. So it's not us, it's the MIT technical review. So current work, we're actually working on an extension of this work. We are working on a hybrid scheme, which we call Desire, where the risk score and notification is still centralized, because we still think it's important that the health authorities keeping control of the risk score and notification, but we decentralize the way the identifier are generated and managed. We're also working on an extension to add backward contact tracing. I guess, I don't know, as you know, but the current solution are using forward contact tracing in the sense that they're trying to identify contacts of infected users. And there are some studies that show that it would be also useful to identify the sources of the infection, right? Because usually the source of this infection happens in clusters. So we're trying to add into TousAntiCovid some mechanism in order to identify clusters and basically to implement backward contact tracing. We have two approaches. The first one is to extend the current robust protocol. And the other approach is to develop new scheme based on QR code for restaurant or closed environment or events. So that this scheme will not rely on Bluetooth, but on QR code. I don't have time to go into the details of these schemes. Instead, I will talk about the 5 lessons that I learned during the scope of this project. It was a long project. We learned a lot of things, but I'm just selected 5 lessons that I think are important to the privacy community. If I can move my, okay. So lesson 5, there is clearly a huge gap between privacy theory, research, and privacy engineering. And Ahmad already alluded on that. But for example, in the research community, decentralization is often seen as the solution to use. But in practice, you realize that decentralization has strong limitation. And it's known actually to the privacy community that decentralization often make a trade-off between availability, security, and privacy. And in fact, in order to fight against some kind of security attack like denial of service attack, you have to use servers. Most decentralized systems end up using server for scalability and abuse control. Okay, this is what I just said. We realize that if you want to protect against some denial of service, you need to have a server. And they usually make unrealistic assumptions about device security. So these limitations are well known. There is a great paper that was written by Carmela Troncoso and some co-authors and were published at PETS 2017. It's actually amazing to see that this paper was written by the people that are co-authoring DP3T. It looks like maybe they need to read the paper again. Lesson 4, and I think that's an important lesson, decentralized plus centralized, it's equal to centralized. What I mean by that, it doesn't make sense to design a decentralized scheme like GAN, and then to integrate it into a system that is centralized. And by the system, I mean by the national health infrastructure. They are by definition centralized. And the current scheme, actually, if you look at the German system, the architecture of the German system, it's supposed to be decentralized. But if you look carefully, there are at least 3 servers, right? So they are basically integrating a decentralized, or at least a so-called decentralized system into a centralized system. And at the end, what you get is a centralized system. Not only you get a centralized system, but you get a centralized system that has all the cons of the centralized system and decentralized system. So it's just I would say bad engineering principle. Lesson 3, and that's also an important lesson. I think we need to promote evaluation by design. So there is a lot of discussion in our community about privacy by design, and I think it's right. You have to think about privacy when you design a system, but you also need to find about evaluation, how you're going to evaluate the systems, because the system only makes sense if at the end they provide some kind of utility, if they are efficient. And in order to do that, you need to collect data. Usually you need to collect even more data that the system is actually collecting. And often we forget about this phase and we keep adding this phase at the end like we're used to do with privacy. And that's something, I guess, that needs more work and more research. It's the development of privacy preserving evaluation by design system. Lesson 2.
Excuse me?
Yes.
5 minutes?
Yes, perfect. Lesson 2, we need user participation and engagement. This is essential. Without people actually using the app, the system will not work, whatever system you are developing. And actually the biggest bug, I like this paper, the biggest bug for COVID exposure app are usually the people. Why? Because you have the chicken and egg problem. The system works only if a lot of people buy into it, but people buy into it only if they know it works. And for this type of app, you need to have like a certain number of people that use it before you get something that works. And that's a chicken and egg problem, and I'm not sure how to actually solve it. The other things that is interesting is that there are some studies that shows that people are happy to use the app to get notified, but usually they don't declare themselves. So they don't want they don't want to declare themselves for the others. So it's a kind of selfish behavior. And so this article, they actually claim that only 13% of people with confirmed case in Switzerland use the app to alert their contact, right? So only 13 or 15% will actually enter the code into the system in order to upload and help the others. They're happy to use it for themselves, but not for the others. And I guess we have very similar result for the French app. And that's, I think, an aspect that need some more research. How do you make people use and participate to the end? Lesson number 1, and maybe the most important lesson, code is law, right? I guess you all know this Laurence Levig statement. The most important is code is not regulation, because code allow you or not to do specific things. And this is exactly what happened with the Google and Apple during this COVID app development in Europe. They basically decided what was possible and what was not possible. They make some strong security assumptions, like protecting social graph is more important than protected infected user, without discussing, without negotiating with governments, with anyone. They just decide by themselves. And the approach was take it or leave it. Okay, so most EU countries decided to take it because, of course, it's easier. Google and Apple was just providing a tool. And I'm happy that France decided to leave it. So they decided to develop their own approach. It was difficult, a lot of time, but we managed to have something which is as good, I would say, in terms of efficiency than the Google and Apple scheme. And all that because they own the code and can do anything they want to with the code. Code is law. But is it acceptable? Do you really think that it's acceptable that a private company decide unilaterally for government and health authority what to do? I don't think so. And here we can question where is the EU sovereignty, right? They just buy some things without actually fighting against it. Thanks for your attention. So I really think that talking it's easy, doing is difficult. We experiment that over the last 8 months, working like crazy. Doing is very difficult. It's much easier to talk. And while there is a question, I will just leave this message to the EU institution if you want to read it. It's actually a message from Susha Zuboff, who clearly claimed that the behavior of companies like Google and Apple is intolerable and incompatible with democracy. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Claude. Is there any question from the viewer? Okay, please.
We have Paul Francis again with a question.
Okay, Paul Francis has a microphone. That's the good.
I have a microphone. Hi, Claude.
Hi.
I think everybody knows that one way to get people to use app is to make the app useful for those people. And I was noticing in your talk that your app has a couple of new features. One is some information, I guess, and one is a way to register you're going out in public or something. Do you have any sense of the effect that these features have on uptake?
No, I mean that's a very good question. No, I mean there is no way we can actually measure, right, why people are using are downloading the app. Is it for the contact tracing facility, or is it for the attestation, or is it for the news? But you're right. I mean, one of the motivation for adding this attestation and information was to motivate people to install the app, to make it more useful, to get this minimum number of people in order and we start seeing the results in terms of number of notifications that are sent and the ratio of notification by code that is entered is increasing. But no, I mean I cannot tell you. I would not be able to tell you what's the.
I mean, one could do a survey or something. You could
Yes.
try to find out.
That could be possible. Yeah. But
are there new features planned along these lines again to make it more useful for people?
Yeah. So the new feature is to add this skin based on QR code for closed places like restaurants. So we all know that the virus actually spread more in closed environment where people do not wear a mask. And the idea is to have a system where whenever you enter into a store or a restaurant, you scan a QR code, and this code has all the information that you need in order to query the server. And if X number of users are tested positive while they were in this place, like in the restaurant, the users will get a warning. Okay, like you've been in a closed environment. There's been 4 people that got infected. Be careful. It's another technology. It won't rely on Bluetooth. It relies on QR code, and it also I think provide new functionality because we are more like focusing on closed environment where we know that people are even more at risk because they don't wear a mask and so on.
So shall we go to the next questions? I don't want really to interrupt this nice discussion, but we have other speakers that we have to go to. So maybe we allow some other questions. Who is the next?
Alexei Greenbaum will be the next.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Claude. So one question we discussed earlier today with Serge's talk was measuring distances. The latest update of the French app has different protocols for measuring distances. It says 5 minutes for up to 1 meter, and then 15 minutes if it's 2 meters. It seems that BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy, is particularly bad in measuring times and distances. How do you implement this kind of thing? Are there any new studies?
So, yeah, I won't be able to answer this question because I'm not the one who worked on the wireless aspect. So I'm gonna just work on the design of the Robert protocol. There is a whole team that is working on the Bluetooth measurement and design. The only thing that I can say is that the fact of deploying our own system gives us more freedom about how to configure the parameters. So we did extensive measurement. We control everything, how the parameters to measure, to estimate the measures are made. And just the fact that we're able to change these parameters, going from 15 to 5 minutes or to 1.5 meter to 2 meter, it's a good example why we need systems that are controlled by the health authority and not rely on Google and Apple willing to do it for us or not. But beside that, I won't be able to go into the details about the measurement. I'm sorry.
Okay, next question. Is that from Emiliano, I assume?
Yes.
So Emiliano, how is it going?
Yes.
Everything cool? So
yes,
before we go to your question, I would like to mention that there are some comments on chats about the talks and also about what, for example, Ivan mentioned in his talk. Please answer these questions. We could answer, but I think it is good when the speakers answer. Another aspect is, and this is before we go to you, it is indeed misunderstood that when people write, Google and Apple have anyway all our data, why should we not give them our health data as well? This is a misconception here. Health data You can bring Google and Apple into your sleeping room, whatever you do there. But health data, this is the holy grail that we always try to, as far as possible, try to protect. So that is just for this. Emiliano, go on.
I'm sorry, if I can add something to that. It's not only that Google and Apple is getting the data, but they also prevent the health authority from getting it. I think that's the most important part, right? They are collecting the data, but this is what we saw during the French. They just did everything to prevent the French health authority to get the data. And that's another issue, right? It's not only getting it. Okay, sorry.
Emiliano, go on.
Yeah, so I do have a mic, so I just had to be muted because my daughter was sleeping. But so yeah, my question for Claude and maybe for the others as well is, with respect to portability. So I think one of the arguments that I've seen made on from various people developing DP3 and so DP3T and so on is that you have this sort of federation of the different decentralized apps, so that the Brits can successfully go get drunk in Ibiza and so on, right? So that you can travel and use your own app in different countries. Can you comment on that and how it reconciles with some of the things that were discussed in these talks? Thank you.
So I guess your question is about interoperability, right?
Yes.
And if you're asking whether the French system is interoperable with the others, I would say no, because the architecture is completely different. We try to make it interoperable, but it's not possible. And it was an argument from the EU to push it. I mean, they put us a lot of pressure to move to this Google and Apple just for interoperability. And I guess it's probably one of the strategy of this Google and Apple and DP3T to push for this solution. They knew that if 3 or 4 countries in Europe will use it, then the others will have to use it as well if you want the system to be interoperable. So they basically managed to convince some countries to use it. Then there was a lot of huge lobbying in Europe. And then little by little, they didn't have much choice, right? I mean, there were already 3 or 4 countries, the others had to do it. But no, I mean, the French government decided that despite the fact that we are not interoperable, we will just go for it. And I'm very happy that the French government decided to do that. It takes a lot of courage to do that. The other thing is that now we're working on this cure-based scheme, right? As I said, for restaurant, I'm just hoping that this part will be compatible throughout Europe, right? So whenever you go, as you said, drink a beer on the French Riviera, or when I go to Salerno, I will at least be able to get some pizza and have this QR code-based interoperable. But that's it.
So why you don't address Darmstadt? You can also have beer here, but you don't have French Riviera. So